studio erupted in a fiery showdown as GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley returned from maternity leave straight into the storm. What began as a debate over the government's radical plan to strip judges of their powers in asylum appeals quickly escalated into a blistering exchange. Accusations of hypocrisy, deception, and political cowardice flew across the table before the clash reached a shocking crescendo that left everyone stunned. Watch the full, explosive encounter unfold, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment of political drama. We want to hear from you. Who do you think was truly exposed in this fiery battle?
Did you know over 95% of our viewers aren't subscribed? Subscribing is free and helps us create more great content. Hit subscribe now and join our community.
We've gone up by 8% just since Labour took office. In the last financial year alone, it's cost $5.4 billion. Now, the reason behind this huge and expanding number of migrants being housed in hotels is how long the asylum process takes. On average, it takes over a year, and sometimes it could take much, much longer, many years, for an asylum decision to be reached. And that is because there's this sort of labyrinthine process between a person applying for asylum and their case finally being either accepted or rejected. Lots of them are rejected right at the beginning, and then they go through this process where they can appeal to a tribunal. Now, what the government is saying at the moment is that the problem is that there's first-tier tribunal judges, as they're called, the very first people you can appeal to if you're an asylum seeker who's had your claim rejected. They are over-interpreting the EU right to a family life and essentially pushing through lots of appeals which the government think, which Yvette Cooper and the Home Office think should not be accepted. So what the government is proposing to do now is get rid of that layer of first-tier tribunal judges, get rid of a layer of the judiciary. So essentially, instead of having those judges, you would just have a board of sort of professional adjudicators, they're calling them. And what the government hopes is that that would mean that lots of those asylum appeals which get accepted would actually be rejected at that very first hurdle. And that would theoretically really speed up the process. Now, there's lots of problems here. Obviously, one of them is that there is this enormous backlog of asylum seekers in hotels. And as you said there in the introduction, it feels like a little bit too little too late. Perhaps if you started with this programme now and you didn't have a backlog, you might be able to clear some cases quickly. But with this sort of bottleneck, it'll be very hard to make an impact at the kind of speed that the government needs an impact to be made. The other problem is that there are going to be lots and lots of left-wing Labour MPs who don't like this at all, who will worry, who will believe that the human rights of these asylum seekers are being compromised because they won't be able to get that legal right to appeal at the very first hurdle. Now, you would think with a Labour majority of whatever it is, I've lost track, but, you know, that huge Labour majority that Keir Starmer won last year, that wouldn't really matter, that this would get through really easily. But as we saw with the welfare bill, actually, those Labour MPs aren't particularly loyal to Keir Starmer, and they could easily upturn this legislation before it even gets through the Commons.
What's to stop these independent adjudicators, like the judges have, over-interpreting the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, I think that's a real worry, and I think Yvette Cooper is very aware of that. Now, she says that what she's going to do is tighten up the guidance in the first instance for these first-tier tribunal judges, and then once they are replaced by the professional adjudicators, for the professional adjudicators too. But of course, you know, people who chooses them, exactly. And also you have people like Nigel Farage, Kemi Badenoch too, would say that some of these judges are motivated by politics, really, that they have a sort of ideological agenda. And as you say, how do you stop those professional adjudicators having exactly the same kind of agenda? Surely the sort of person who decides to go into that job has a kind of real interest in human rights and might interpret them in exactly the same way as the judges have done before them. I think the Home Office thinks that they might have a little bit more control over professional adjudicators employed by the Home Office than they do by lawyers.
Do you think any government at the moment would be able to solve this crisis in time? It's just, as you were explaining at the beginning, they can't. If they were starting from zero, they might be able to actually invent a system that worked. But now there is such a horrendous backlog that can you ever catch up?
Well, it's a really interesting question. And of course, Nigel Farage believes that he can. Really interesting interview with him yesterday in the Times. Even he admits that it would be incredibly expensive. What he would like to do is have a 6-month voluntary returns period, a sort of amnesty, essentially, where migrants who've come here, who are awaiting their appeals, so they're being housed in hotels at the moment, could choose to be sent home. Now, he would immediately give them, no questions asked, £2,500 and pay all of their airfares and expenses to get back to the country that they came from. He admits that that would be very, very expensive indeed, but he says that actually over the course of 5 or 10 years, the overall cost would be a lot smaller. So that's what he thinks he could do. That's the kind of most drastic, most dramatic solution. Kemi Badenoch is going to announce, we're pretty sure, at Conservative Party conference that she would want to leave the European Court of Human Rights. Obviously, that would speed things up a lot more. But as you say, with a backlog this size, it's going to be really, really tricky, particularly with just so much opposition from within the establishment. Left-wing Labour MPs, human rights lawyers, charities, Refugee Council is very vocal at the moment too. It's a really, really tough ask.
Yes, I don't envy the government's trying to do this, actually.
No, and you could argue that if Nigel Farage is looking forward to the point where he might become Prime Minister, you've got another 4 years of not sorting out the problem. So how big's the backlog going to be by then?
Indeed, and lawyers making a lot of money out of all of this as well.
Yes, you can't help think they were laughing all the way to the bank. Olivia, thanks very, very much indeed. Lovely to see you back.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Next UK, your go-to for real stories and sharp analysis.